Welcome to the Next Pivot Point podcast. This season, I'm focused on sharing stories and ideas from experts on diversity and inclusion. In this episode, I will share some insights and story from my guest expert, Ekta Goel. Together, we will leave you with some actionable tips to think about and discuss with your organization. We share this information because inclusive leadership's a journey. It requires bravery and courage, and you do not have to do it alone. At Next Pivot Point, we believe we're stronger together. We are one. So I'm going to meet Ekta, this week's guest. Ekta Goel is recently relocated to the U.S. from India. She's been here about 10 months, and she brings with us a total of 9 years of rich HR experience. In her last role, she was a vice president of learning and development and talent management. Prior to that, she's led organizational development functions and has also been an HR consultant serving clients across many industries and geographies. Welcome to the show, Edka.
Thank you so much, Julie. Thank you for a warm welcome and such an elaborate introduction. Really happy and honored to be on your show.
Well, this feeling is mutual. I know we connected early on in the pandemic days, and I can only
Yes.
imagine the empathy I felt for you being new to a country, away from home, and it felt like the world was ending. Of course, now things have settled down a little bit, but still
Yes.
change and social unrest now. And so we've been connected and been able to do some partnership with the Association of Talent Development, did some speaking on Lead Like an Ally recently this fall, which was great. And so I appreciate you being an ally, inviting me to join that conversation. And I thought before we dug into that, I could tell our listeners, what has your career journey been like? Kind of walk us through your career and how you got engaged in diversity, inclusion, and learning.
Yeah. No, sure. Thank you, Julie. So the reason why, your podcast really interested me because it touches a topic which is very close to my heart, which is diversity and inclusion. And if I were to just simplify it and look at it as a third person, I see it as a topic where we are trying to bring together and stand together for people who are in minority, whether it's the difference of opinion, whether it's the surface level diversity, or whether it's the deep level diversity that we're talking
Mm-hmm.
about. So I have been a person who is being born and brought up in a small town in India. And gender diversity was something which maybe as a formal term I was not aware about while growing up. But as I grew, as I went through education, as I started working in the corporate career, I faced various circumstances, various situations where it came alive. And now, when you hear about it, you see, oh, I went through that situation because maybe people were not very open and accepting of a different opinion or a different stereotype talking about certain situations. So, if I were to talk about my journey, so as I mentioned, I grew up in a small town and I did mechanical engineering. Now, it mean just to give you a context, in India, mostly mechanical engineering, there would be hardly 1 or 2% women in the entire class of maybe 100 plus. So it's fairly interesting because you are a minority and you are learning a subject which a lot of women don't really pursue. So that was my first encounter with being in a situation where I was outnumbered, and second, I had an opinion which I had to really work hard to prove myself that why my opinion is equally important as against others. Then I went to IIM Calcutta, which is one of the Ivy League colleges in India. Uh, Again, to give you the context, it's the Harvard equivalent. So again, there, yes, the percentage increased, but the percentage of women were again 10% out of a batch of 408. So, and then when you gradually move to the corporate, you realize that few of the industries, they do have a lot of women workforce, but still when you encounter your clients, when you encounter your peers, there will be those managers and your leaders who would have worked in organizations where there is an open mindset, but you would still have people who unconsciously would make statements or would work in a fashion where you have to constantly work towards proving your expertise. So it seems on a constant basis, you are working in two directions. One, when you're really trying to prove your expertise, and second, when you're trying to negate what other people are saying because they are trying to pull you in the different direction. And in my last role, it became fairly interesting because I was the first female leader who was appointed as the vice president ever in the history. So that
Wow.
was again fairly interesting. And I got to know about it only when I joined that organization. Thankfully, I had leaders who backed me. And they did talk about my expertise and candidature way before I joined. But when I joined, I could see that there were times when I had to prove myself as an individual before I could talk about the topic that was under consideration. So,
Yeah.
and it feels bad that you the like Julie, as you spoke about in your presentation, it's like the equality versus equity.
Mm-hmm.
Though the same field is being given, you realize that there are certain lenses which are kind of pushing you downwards, so you have to really work hard, in a different direction, or you want some extra support to bring you in the same level playing field.
Yeah. Well, what you were saying, Edgar, really reminds me of one of the gender biases that's so prevalent still in the workplace. And sometimes we don't even know it's happening until we have language around it to know it's happening. And it's not just happening to
Yeah,
me, it's happening to a lot of women. But it's called the prove it again bias of always
yeah,
having to prove yourself, not just once, not just twice, but sometimes 3 or 4 times when a man oftentimes doesn't have to prove himself at all. We just
yeah,
assume that based on his potential, because he's usually a man, usually white, that we've seen people like that succeed before, so therefore he must be capable as well. Whereas if we haven't
right,
seen a woman, especially a woman of color, advance here in the United States, we're very suspicious of it because our brain has this bias because we just haven't seen it enough times to know that this could be okay too, that this person could
right,
do,
right,
which isn't totally, I mean, it's just being human is that bias, but the behavior is what's not okay. So really
that's right.
understanding if you behave in accordance with that bias, that's the problem. And sounds like from your experiences, constantly having to back up what you're saying, constantly having to defend things, it's exhausting. It's like, why won't they just believe me? I know what I'm doing. I have the degrees. I have the experience. Listen to me.
Right. And when you start wearing different hats in your life journey, when you get married, when you become a mother, you realize that you have to work even harder to prove yourself because
Mhm.
it's given and it's kind of understood that she might be focusing more time on the personal life,
Mhm.
and and she must be really struggling with work life balance, and hence
Right.
she might not be giving equal amount of time to the professional life.
Isn't that
But
interesting
I
too?
would say that we are better jugglers. We know how to juggle multiple balls together.
Right. Well, and the assumption in that is that somehow men as fathers are not participating at the same rate that women are as mothers, which
Mm.
is another bias area.
Yes.
On the motherhood penalty, we often assume women in the childbearing years, even if they don't have children, but they could have children, right? That somehow they are less committed to their work or they will have less time available
Yes.
for the work, that they can't travel as much, stay after hours, be promoted. All of these activities, we know that there's a cliff, that women advance to a certain point in their career and then just fall off. And it's at this
Right.
just happens to be at the same time we have children. So I think there's more to
Yes.
the story. To your point,
Yes.
it's like, yeah, I've heard that saying before. If you want something done, give it to a busy woman. She will get it done. Like you said, we can juggle. We know how to get a lot done because we have to. Uh,
Yes.
and we know how to navigate this. Trust us. As someone that's having a baby, it's been fascinating the experience I've had 6 years ago in corporate America, just being totally dismissed as somebody in the workplace the last few months. Like, Julie's not traveling, Julie's not doing this, we're not putting her on this project. It was like I was a ghost. It's like they talked to me tense. I'm like, okay, I'll go home early. Fine by me. I just was kind of like, all right, I guess this is how this works. Um, and this time, not so much, because people can't see me. I think is a big part of that. But also, I manage a business focused on diversity, and I just tell them, listen, I'm going to be out for this month. you
Yes.
you can see me here, and no bias. I mean, I can safely say, and I don't think this is representative of where we're at in 2020.
Well,
I know that we still have a lot of
that's
work
true.
to do, but I can safely say I have experienced very little bias this time around versus 6 years ago. So some things are changing, but not quickly enough.
Yes, yes. I think one, the awareness levels at an overall, like, across the organizations and across leaders, that's enhancing. And second, very slowly though, but people have started seeing value that diversity brings on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And especially, like, with this pandemic where things have changed, and each and everyone has experienced that there could be different ways of doing things which maybe we were not even aware about, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden our eyes have opened up to that. And this further will help in bridging those gaps, in kind of making people aware that maybe we need to start looking differently at things, and there
Mm-hmm.
is always a merit in that.
Well, and while we're changing due to the pandemic and just a lot of change has happened very quickly, we can change other things.
Yep.
And maybe it wasn't so hard to change some of these systems that we thought had to be a certain way.
Right.
I think women in particular have been advocating for virtual work and work from home policies for a
Yes.
long time and been met on
Yes.
deaf ears. So it's a great example of something. So an article recently that said for the first time ever, men will be in a female dominated workspace, the home. And I thought that is a
Yes.
funny way to
Yes.
look at where we're at today. So tell us, Ekta, I mean, being the only woman on the leadership team, what was that like for you? And what do you think the opportunities are for gender diversity based on your experiences and what you're seeing with organizations?
So, Julie, I would kind of divide my experience in two parts. One with my immediate team, and second would be with leaders where I could sense certain level of skepticism. So, with my immediate team, it was fairly good, and I think I owe it to the leader under whom I was working, because he made sure, one, he was pretty supportive of what I bring to the table and what are my personal challenges, which he needs to cover the ground for if he wants me to work with a free mind. So I really owe it to him. And my team could see the value in getting a different perspective
Mhm.
and the way I could bring the team together. However, there was the other part of the world where there were leaders whom I had to constantly prove, especially one being new, and second, having a very different mindset in a traditional world. So there I could see that, it completely depends as a professional how you approach. So in my initial meetings, I actually did not work too hard in terms of building my credibility. My focus was really in understanding my stakeholders in terms of what do they think and why they think the way they think. And then only I could tailor my solutions and the way I put it across to fit the bill.
Mhm.
Otherwise, had I just kept wearing my expertise hat, it wouldn't have worked at all, because then I was fighting a wrong battle. So thankfully, my consulting taught me to read the stakeholders before you kind of present your solution. That worked. Yes, there were still few stakeholders with whom I continued fighting the battles, which obviously was not going to reap any results. But I
Mhm.
had to do it because, you cannot walk in different directions with different stakeholders.
Yeah, it reminds me of what's in it for them. Framing the buy-in up front and kind of flexing our style to meet the style of the stakeholders. And oftentimes, as women, we have to be nimble to the male voices in the room, what they want to hear, what they care about, and tailoring our message to support that. So I think short term, it's a strategy we have to live by. I wish we didn't, but it is one that definitely increases listening on the other side.
Yes, yes.
If you think about where we can go with something like gender diversity and in the lenses of which you see this now through different organizations, where like we're still at a point where record number of women CEOs is not even 8%
Yeah.
in the United States. Where do you think, having been globally, seeing, differences in India, like where are we going with this? Where do you think gender diversity has a place in the future?
It's enhancing for sure, Judy. And there are societal factors included in it, and there are organizational factors which are kind of supporting it. From a society perspective, there is an increasing awareness where people are understanding the impact that a woman or a girl, when she goes and attends college, can create to the society and to her overall well-being of her life. So that is increasing. So the percentages of women who used to get the opportunity to attend school and higher level of education, that's constantly increasing. And also government is kind of supporting a lot of programs where they are financially helping families to send their female child to the school.
Mhm.
Second, at an organizational level, also with the enhancing awareness about what the business case for diversity, the business case for inclusion, and what it might bring to the table, and also bringing leaders who come from various multinational companies and hence have seen how it can positively impact the organization.
Mhm.
That is helping organizations become more diversity focused, I would say. There is still a long way to go when it comes to inclusion.
Yeah, yeah. And I agree. If you've benefited from it in the past or had led a multinational company where you know the dimensions of diversity when they come together, you get that ROI. If you've seen that before, it's a lot easier to naturally promote inclusion in the workplace and do the hard work to drive diversity. Okay, I'm curious, as somebody that's recently come to the US, I've had some interesting conversations lately with folks that have come from other parts of the world, and they're like, "I thought the U.S. was it's like the land of the free, and like where equal opportunities exist for everyone." And come to find
Yes.
out, we have a lot of problems with this. What have you noticed as the cultural differences here versus in India?
Couple of things, Julie. One, definitely the number of women workforce. If I just count from the percentage, that's higher for sure. However, what I realize when you kind of deep dive is it there is still a glass ceiling. The most of the women workforce are from a junior to middle to slightly mid to senior level, but at the
Mhm.
topmost level there is still the scenario is maybe not same but similar across the world. So I
Yep.
think that's where the similarity lies.
Yep.
uh, I think there is still, there is diversity, and there is a bias still exists. So I still remember having speaking to a couple of CEOs and leaders, and I was taken aback when some of the statements were being made. Oh, you are from India, but your English, and you are an Indian woman, but your English is still good. And I was like, that's a highly biased statement.
And quite offensive.
So I kind of felt like saying, even your English is very good, but
Right.
I kind of kept it back because I could realize where they were coming from. Maybe they didn't have that intention, but it was a very unconscious statement which was being made. So the biasness still exists in various form. I think we still want to see like me kind of people around us because we feel more comfortable with it. And that's where, again, there are similarities. People need to open up to having different point of views and being actually comfortable with it.
Yeah.
If it just remains a policy, it will not impact. We need to be okay, and we need to be valuing differences.
Mhm. Well, we talked about that, differences beyond appearances too. So
Yeah.
a lot of times here in the US, we liken diversity to gender and race. Things we think we can see, which by the way, a lot of times you can't see these things optically, but it feels better to quantify them by things that are evident, that we think are evident appearance wise. So why, why do we need to think about diversity beyond just appearance?
I think because the moment you talk about differences, the person whosoever is slightly different from the majority, that person lacks confidence to some extent. And until unless we kind of get into the mode of supporting the person,
Mm-hmm.
Why do you want that person to fight battles over and above the ones which he or she is already fighting?
Mm-hmm.
I think that is the mindset. If all of us start having, we will automatically start becoming allies to people who are different, who are in minorities, and who are struggling to come at par with other people who have overall benefits across.
Yeah. Yeah, if we keep looking at the differences, we're just going to see more differences. And it puts it in like an us versus them kind of
Yeah.
categorization. So
Yes.
rather than look at the similarities, but also the unique layers of difference that might be beyond the eye that bring a value add to the workforce, right? It's not just differences. It's like, this is a good new perspective that we're missing right now. I mean, I would
Yes.
think right now companies that have business in India and Asia would welcome you, right? With your background, you're going to be much more likely to understand consumer mindset, cultural differences, bring such value and insight from those perspectives. So instead of looking at it, it's like, oh, wow, her English is almost as good as ours, or however people are looking at it, it just creates
Right.
these walls. And it's funny, I use that on the slide a lot in my unconscious bias training of your English is very good. How many times people of color are told that, like, what? Like, they're so puzzled by that. Like, what
Right.
were you expecting exactly? Is the bar really that low?
I,
And your English is quite good as well. I think is a good response, kind of tongue in cheek to some biased behavior.
yes.
Well, Ekta, it's been so fun to talk with you today. Parting words, thoughts on thinking about the future of diversity, equity, inclusion. Where do you think things are going?
I think world is going to get better for sure compared to what we were in the past, given current scenarios of Black Lives Matter and a lot of other campaigns. I think what it has done, it has brought the right emphasis that this topic should have gotten long back.
Mm-hmm.
It's like everybody knew that diversity and inclusion is important, but it it remained good to do kind of a thing for organization. But
Mm-hmm.
with what's going on in the world today, it's gotten the right level of emphasis which it should. And yes, as you also mentioned in your session, it's not that things are going to change, but yes, things will expedite for sure.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
maybe something which would have taken 20 years, maybe now it's going to take 10 years for things to change.
It's a long game. It's a journey,
Yes.
destination. However, yeah, maybe we're accelerating that journey, and the more allies we get on board with this, the quicker we're going to move. So how do we get that magic middle, those folks in the middle that want to get it, that don't quite get it yet, was a big subject. So I'd kind of got to do a talk at the Association of Talent Development in Texas, where she lives, and some really great discussions with HR leaders and learning leaders about allyship and how to have inclusive leadership conversations in the workplace. So it was really fun to kind of see what's ever on everyone's mind. Everyone wants to know, what do I need to do to demonstrate being an ally? Listen to these episodes, listen to all the voices out there talking actively about this. Do your own education, but start to take action with these words. Think about bias and how you can intervene with that and with other people when they say problematic things, and look out for some of these biases, these gender biases that Eka brought up today. I think these are some real tangible things, action steps for an ally. So Eka, thanks so much for being on the show. Tell our listeners, how can they stay in touch with you?
Oh, thank you, Julie, for the opportunity. I thoroughly enjoyed our session. And just one last thing which I would want to say before we kind of sign off is I think we should not wait for just HR professionals to design policies. As parents, as individuals, so the game really starts at home. If we are going to build the next generation which does not believe in seeing differences but just knows that each and every one is unique, I think we will be contributing in our own manner.
Yeah.
And I would love to connect with any of you who would be listening to this podcast. I can be found on LinkedIn as Ekta Goel, Ektagoel. So would love to connect with anyone and maybe just chat more over diversity and inclusion over a cup of coffee.
That's so good. Yeah, we got to be doing this at home if we're going to do it in the workplace. And we can't wait for others to tap us to do it. We've got to get on the journey ourselves. Great parting
Yes.
words, Edka. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Julie. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Who do you know that needs to hear this message? Hit the share button and connect with me and Edka on LinkedIn. You can search my name. It's spelled Julie Kratz, Juliekratz, and you can find and share this episode anywhere you get podcasts. Remember, every review helps other allies find us. I host this podcast because I believe we are stronger together. We are one.